Hello, I'm Rev Dr Swarup Bar. I'm a professor of theology at Bishop's College, Kolkata, India, and also the presbyter in charge of St. Andrew's Church under the Diocese of Calcutta, SEI. And it's been my privilege and honor to share a series of lectures on Indian Christian theology, which definitely I teach my students back in India at Bishop's College. And I hope these series of lectures would be helpful and insightful for all those who would be looking forward to it. Thank you very much. So in this third lecture, we are going to talk about the theology of interfaith dialogue. Now, interfaith concerns were born out of Christianity's spread in different contexts. Christianity began in a Jewish environment, but soon came into contact with the Greco-Roman world, which had influenced Christianity a lot later on, and of course its theology as well. Before we enter into the theology of interfaith dialogue in India, it would be useful to go into a little bit of a historical background of interfaith dialogue or talk of interfaith dialogue that has happened through various world conferences, particularly the World Council of Churches Conference, starting of course with mission conferences, and one of the very prominent ones is the 1910 Edinburgh Conference. The focus in that conference, of course, to begin with, was an evangelistic one, with a missionary zeal to spread the Christian message during that generation among, of course, people of other faiths. The next conference in 1928 was the Jerusalem Conference. Of course, it continued to be missionary in approach and attitude, and of course talked about the spread of the Christian gospel, but on the other hand talked about the positive affirmation of other faiths or the value of other faiths. Hendrik Kramer, the Dutch Reformed theologian, wrote a book called The Christian Mission in a Non-Christian World, and this was written for the following conference, which had happened in Tambaram, Madras in 1938. This particular book or work was heavily criticized by liberal and Indian theologians for its exclusivism of Christianity. Missionaries like A.G. Hogg, a Scottish missionary, which we have talked earlier about, contended against Kramer in presenting a positive attitude towards other religions. In fact, Hogg was talking about more positive relationship with other religions rather than an exclusive one. After Tambaram and in the post-World War II period, the attention, of course, was focused on Asia, where outstanding work was carried on by the likes of Indian theologians like P.D. Devanandan and others. Devanandan challenged the churches, and this was in World Council of Churches conference in 1961, to take seriously the experience of the younger churches in the newly independent countries, where missionaries had to work and struggle together with people of different religious traditions. He also encouraged people to talk about nation building as part of the interfaith dialogical process. The World Council of Churches Conference at Kandy, Sri Lanka in 1967 proved to be a landmark as the beginning of serious interest in interfaith dialogue and as the first involvement in ecumenical discussions regarding interfaith dialogue. The Kandy meeting affirmed dialogue to be the most appropriate approach in interfaith relations, and after the Uppsala Assembly in 1968, of the WCC, a commission on world mission and evangelism was engaged in, where Stanley J. Samartha was the primary person behind the work on the Word of God and the living faiths of men. The WCC consultation in Azulton, Lebanon in 1970 actually engaged in Hindu, Buddhist, Muslim and Christian participants, which was a great way forward in terms of interfaith dialogue. In 1971, the WCC Addis Ababa meeting actually created, as an aftermath, a new subunit on dialogue with people of living faiths and ideologies, with Samartha as its director. Now, before we go into particular contributions of Indian theologians into interfaith dialogue, let us look at some general understandings of dialogue that is prominent in Christian circles in India. Basically, interfaith dialogue is understood as an encounter between people who live by different faith traditions in an atmosphere of mutual trust and acceptance. Dialogue does not require giving up, hiding, or seeking to validate one's own religious convictions. In fact, the need for being rooted in one's own tradition and to be engaged in meaningful dialogue is the one that should be emphasized, as in addition the common humanity and the need to search for life in community amidst the divided world. These things are supposed to be emphasized in an interfaith dialogue. Dialogue is seen as a way not only to become informed, but also to rediscover essential dimensions of one's own faith and also others. The benefits of dialogue is in removing historical prejudices and enmities, as well as new possibilities for working together for common good are also recognized and affirmed in these discussions. Now, having given a little bit of an overview of the understanding of interfaith dialogue, let us move into two very prominent theologians who had talked and theologized about interfaith dialogue. The first one is P.D. Devanandan, 1901 to 1962. P.D. Devanandan was born in Madras or Chennai in 1901, did his PhD from Yale and returned later to teach at the United Theological College, Bangalore. Devanandan's was primarily a theology of Christian participation in nation building and of dialogue with religious and secular ideals, because this is about post-independence India. Devanandan stressed that there should be a new understanding of human beings based on principles of Christian and secular education. And this is to prepare us for dialogue in this contemporary world. There should be an effort to find new expressions of other religions to suit the modern age. Devanandan believed that Christian concern and dialogue in society ought to be geared towards the development of the whole human being, not only for spiritual or religious purposes only. And in this sense, God's reign is to be understood not exclusively, but as a community including people of other faiths. In this sense, Devanandan envisaged three different stages in the task of Christian dialogue. Whenever we have dialogue with other religions, at first, as he proposed, we should have a detailed study of that particular religion, Hinduism, or for that matter any other religion. Second, there should be a clarification of various kinds of terminology involved in that particular religion we are studying. The third is the daring task of evolving an Indian theological expression of the Christian faith in relationship with other religious faiths. In his work Preparation for Dialogue, he expressed, and I quote, "Effective communication of the gospel to people of other faiths depend on effective use made of the religious vocabulary with which one is familiar, and also the cultural pattern of life in which one finds self-expression and community being." End of quote. On the other hand, along with A.G. Hogg, Devanandan wished to discover a seeking and finding of God in other religions. And on the other, he was also concerned to assert the uniqueness of the Christian faith in and amidst various religious explorations. Devanandan defined the gospel as a gift for a new humanity, a new creation in Jesus Christ, and there he finds the role of the church to actively participate in the society for a new society to be made through spiritual dialogues with religious and secular faiths. Of course, he spoke of God's redemptive activity outside the church with a theocentric understanding. But of course, Devanandan, on the other hand, was very cautious not to go too far with his extra ecclesial speculations. But on the other hand, he is willing to see the movement of the Holy Spirit in other religions outside the church. His is a theology of church-centeredness, but also going beyond the church in establishing relationship with other religions. Devanandan interpreted conversion as a sign of God's new creation, the true origin of community. In all these aspects, the church has a part to play. The church should project itself as a people's movement with its mission of presenting Christ in terms of dialogic participation in a common struggle for the renewal of personal and corporate life in a pluralistic society. For him, the church is an integral ingredient in God's design for the world's redemption. It's not supposed to be an exclusive community of the saved, nor identified with the kingdom to come. But the church is supposed to be an open fellowship, signifying the universal activity of Christ and welcoming of people from all backgrounds into the church to those who acknowledge Jesus Christ as Lord. The church should offer ministry and service primarily in terms of meeting actual human needs wherever necessary, and it should also fulfill God's ultimate purpose for humans to be part of the kingdom. Hence, in the theology developed by P.D. Devanandan, a triad of components hold together, and these are service or diaconia, preaching or kerygma, and fellowship or koinonia. Another significant personality which we have talked about briefly a few moments ago is Stanley Samartha and his contribution to interfaith dialogue. Stanley Jedida Samartha was born on October 7, 1920 in Karkal in the state of Karnataka in India. He was at one time the professor of religions at United Theological College, Bangalore, and later became the principal of Serampur College, and thereafter the director of World Council of Churches unit of dialogue with living faiths and ideologies. Here we will look at some of his thoughts on interfaith dialogue. According to Samartha, there can be no dialogue between religions. Dialogue can take place only between people of living faiths. While concepts and ideas are important, the first step in real dialogue is to realize that religion is much more than its creeds formulated in particular categories. As per Samartha, dialogue is much more than talking activity. It involves larger relationships of living together and working together. Informed understanding, critical appreciation, and balanced judgment. These cannot arise except where people meet in trust, openness, and commitment. He goes on further to say that dialogue has as its basis the commitment of all partners to their respective faiths and their openness towards others' insights. Here, the integrity of particular religious faiths are recognized. Of course, there are some challenges when we talk about interfaith dialogue. He points out that interreligious dialogue should not lead to syncretism, a kind of fruit salad of religions. Syncretism is an uncritical mixture of different religions, and it might lead to spiritual poverty, theological confusion, and ethical impotence. It would be foolish to eliminate fundamental differences between religions in the interest of shallow friendliness. On the other hand, interreligious dialogue should not be used by any of the participants as a subtle tool for mission, that is, to promote the interests of one particular faith community to the detriment of the others. In many situations of dialogue, there is an authentic and inescapable commitment to share and to witness. However, it should not amount to a unilateral self-projection, but lead to open hospitality, whereby each may share in what is most precious to the other. Also, dialogue does not lead to a superficial consensus or a dilution of our convictions or false harmony. It must lead to the enrichment of all in the discovery of new dimensions of truth. It's also important to say that dialogue should not be limited to academic discussions of conceptual ideas. The other aspects of religions, like rituals, significance of symbols and experiences of devotion, and the ongoing dialogue that happens in our lives day to day, should not be ignored in our discussions. Even though dialogue sometimes begins with specially delegated people, sometimes it seems it's for special people or specialists, it should spread into wider circles involving large number of peoples and communities. and help to shed their fear and distrust of each other in order to build up mutual trust and confidence. Dialogue should lead to the discovery of deeper dimensions of one's own faith and to the re-examining and furthering of one's own understanding of one's faith and practice. So in conclusion, as we have seen, interfaith dialogue, starting from a historical background, has been very, very important for Indian theology and Indian context, as it leads to good relationships with other communities and other religions in order that we may live harmoniously and peacefully in the nation.